Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. We are broadcasting on YouTube and several Facebook pages. So if you're just joining, welcome. You are welcome to write your comments and questions in the chat, wherever you are seeing this broadcast. And we will try to answer your questions and also share your comments. I have a couple of amazing guests with me today, but before I bring them on, I just wanted to kind of put things in perspective a little bit. I feel like the world is falling apart. I mean, everybody does. And it just, the chaos is nonstop. Every day, there's something else that's going on that keeps adding to our stress. I don't know one person that is not going through something, in addition to the whole COVID situation, whatever that's about. There's fires in California, there's hurricanes, there's crazy stuff around the planet right now. Very unusual, very different. So I really think this is a new timeline for humanity, for planet Earth. And so what do we do? We feel like we're so much out of control about a lot of things. And so because of that, I feel like what is really needed at this time, because we cannot turn to outside sources for reassurance or any sort of support in general, I would say. I feel like we need to bring everything back to what we can control, which is our own consciousness, our own mind. And so that's why, for those who know me, of course, I've been teaching and supporting you through energy medicine and consciousness work for the past 15, 20 years. But I feel now more than ever before, this is the time to really take charge of your mind, of your consciousness, and really use that to try to shift your reality as best you can. I mean, like I said, because the world is bombarding us with so many difficult circumstances. So, but at least we can try to control our experience of it. And so that's the reason why, of all the subjects, why are we talking about telekinesis today? It's not about telekinesis, meaning moving a physical object without any physical contact. What is the relevance? So to me, it's not about moving the physical object. It's about how did you get your mind or your consciousness to move the physical object? This is what this is about. So to me, this is just one more tool that we can use to train our mind to focus on something and make it do what we want it to do, what we hope for it to do. And so because from that perspective of really not so much understanding the phenomenon itself, which of course that's a whole, that's why I'm bringing on those incredible scientists with me today. We want to understand the phenomenon itself. But what I want to take out of this whole experience, and what I want you to be able to take out of it, is how did you get your consciousness, your mind, to achieve that result? Because if you can have the effect on a physical object, a piece of paper, a piece of foil, this means you can have the effect on your physical body. That is the bottom line, okay? So that is the important relevance of this topic today. It's just another important tool that we have been using, I've been using, my guests have been using, so many people have been using. So we just taught a class also on telekinesis, and it works, and it brings you that sort of empowerment. So that's the reason why we're talking about telekinesis today. And I encourage everybody to look at this subject very seriously. So as you know, I've just released a film called Superhuman, The Invisible Made Visible. In the film, we demonstrate, we do all kinds of experiments, again, to demonstrate the effect of consciousness on physical matter, on the physical world. One of these experiments is telekinesis. In fact, we demonstrate several experiments. And of course, I had to reach out to scientists who have been doing this and who can bring a scientific explanation to the phenomenon. And so I found George. Gosh, it's been already 3-4 years or something, because George was in my last movie, and so I was very excited. He was willing to come back on for this movie. George is a theoretical physicist, and so I'm not going to do too much about him. I'm going to let him share with you. And Mike Willicke, that I met later through George, by the way, who is a neuroscientist, also studying telekinesis. So I was so excited to find these prominent scientists. I mean, talk about credibility. These are the real deal, you guys, and who are experimenting in the field of telekinesis. So I'm going to bring them on. Here we go. Hello, my dear Mike. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
Yeah, so good to see you. I'm going to bring George at the same time. That way we can have a three-way conversation, because you guys also know each other. Hey, George.
Hi, Caroline. Hi, Mike.
Hi, George.
So good to see you. So, so my first question to you, you are in the film, but you've been actually working with telekinesis for some time. Why would a neuroscientist or a theoretical physicist get into telekinesis? What was the trigger, the catalyst that made you want to say, I need to investigate and do that myself? George?
Well, I've been interested when I became a physicist and I started to study quantum theory. At first, it was just something that I did problems in, and that I kind of understood how to use it. But as I thought more and more about how the world would have to be in order to show these quantum effects to behave the way that we know from quantum theory, then it began to become a real kind of a long journey. And I was aided in this journey because at the same time that I was studying quantum theory, I also I began to practice Buddhism. And this journey inward, which could be called spirituality, and this journey outward, which could be called science, seemed to be going different directions with different methods. But I began to see that, as many other people have, that science and spirituality can be integrated into a whole view, and that's been pretty much what I've been interested in for most of my life. And to answer your question specifically, so in quantum theory, you only talk about the probability of a certain thing happening. So you have, if I have this situation, then the probability that if I do this, I will see this. If I do that, I'll see that. You get these probabilities, but there's supposed to be no reason. It's supposed to be completely random or stochastic what actually happens. Only the likelihood of it happening is given. And so that never made sense to me, this randomness and this kind of it's something I can't even wrap my mind around, what a randomness would be, other than just not knowing the details. But at some point I realized that if the developing understanding of quantum theory, which I was working on, which I called quantum paradigm, if that is true, then there would have to be you see, okay, let me just say one thing. The idea that there is that the world is out there objectively and I'm separate is not really commensurable with quantum theory. So you have to think of the world as
I'd agree. I'd say it's not. I don't think it's also correct, even from a neuroscience and perceptual perspective too. So I think that it also is what you talk about spirituality and physics. I think is also being borne out also through even I'd say even neuroscience as well. So
Yeah.
I'm supporting what you said.
Yeah. Because Mike, you also got into it also a little bit like George. It's was it from a Buddhist experience? I mean, what was the trigger for you to want to look into something like this?
Yeah, so for me, it was an experience I had after a year and a half of intensive Zen meditation practice through I was a professor at the University of Rochester, and in Rochester there is a very good Zen center that was founded by a pioneer in American Zen named Philip Kapleau, who spent I think 25, 30 years in a Japanese Zen monastery, and then came back to the West and then opened up this monastery. So he's one of the real pioneers in bringing Zen to the United States. And so after a year and a half, I actually was going to my first retreat, and I was walking out the doors of the building where my lab is. It was a Friday afternoon, and walking down this path that I always would walk on to get to my car, and I looked up at this tree, and at that instant, what they say is everything changes, but nothing changes. That instant, the world flipped. It's as if it flipped inside out. What was inside, what I believed to be inside me, became outside. What was outside of what I believed to me suddenly became inside. It's like a mirror flipping 180 degrees, and it was just this instant of this moment, and everything. So Philip Kapleau wrote a book called Three Pillars.
So Mike, sorry, this is fascinating. That's why I'm interrupting real quick, because all the listeners are very much into the experiential, and same with George's experience is spiritual. So can you tell us a little bit more, because I find this fascinating. So you're looking at the tree. What does it mean that everything that's inside was outside? Were you seeing your emotions, your thoughts?
No, it was
what is that?
Perceptual. It was a pure. It had nothing to do with emotion.
Oh,
or it was a not an emotional reaction or an emotional experience. It was a purely, so what I call it, a figure ground. So in visual neuroscience, or when you look at an image and you look at it perceptually, you talk about there's a figure and there's a ground. So actually a really good example is there's many visual illusions, and one of the best known, there's a image of a vase.
yes.
The vase, actually, if you look at the vase as the foreground and the background, the black on the outside, then you see a vase. But if you just flip your attention, and instead of focusing on the foreground vase, you now put your attention on the background, what you actually see are two profiles,
right,
of women's faces. And you actually, some people, don't see that initially. They say, no, there's no women's faces. All I see is the vase. So I believe the experience, the enlightenment experience, there's nothing mystical. It's not a paranormal experience. I believe it's a purely it's a shift of your attention onto an aspect of reality that normally you take for granted, and your brain just doesn't see it. In fact, they talk about pointing, there's a Zen saying of, using your finger and pointing to the moon or pointing to things, but you can point to it, but you won't see it unless your mind and attention moves to it. And I think we are raised to not perceive what I would call is the background. We just see objects. We see, a tree. I see George. I see you, but we don't see the space. We think of space as something empty and kind of just a thing in which objects fill it.
Right.
But I don't believe that's true after this experience. Space is actually it's a container for objects, but it's as important as the objects itself. And it's just a matter of getting your mind to shift to see the background of the vase, to see the profile of the two women, rather than just concentrate. So we walk through our lives just concentrating on all these objects.
So fascinating.
There's actually this space that connects. So I believe the space actually connects all of us together in a way that we don't really understand, but it's there. It's important.
Yeah. So what you're saying is when you fill in the blanks, which is
right,
you realize that there is no separation between this vase and the tree. No. It's the tree continues into the vase and vice versa because space is filled. That's incredibly interesting.
Well, it's like if you have a coin, or like the yin yang, the black and white, you can't have light without darkness. They complement, but they also, one gives form to the other.
Right. And so, so then if I'm trying to move this object that's in front of me,
it's not outside of us.
Exactly. The space between me and the object is not empty. It's connected.
Well, our mind is creating the emptiness of space, and it's an illusion, and I don't believe it's a correct interpretation of how our brain is organizing our sensory world. I think it's just something that most people, I think, are born and then are raised to interpret our sensory experience in that way. And I think in the enlightenment experience and meditation is a way of undoing that habitual reaction and that habitual way of interpreting sensory and experience, so that we actually begin to see the background. And we say, hey, there's women's faces. It's not just this thing. It's not just a vase. There actually is structure to it. There's something there.
Yeah, I love this. And also it's been demonstrated that space is not empty, but it's like a programming, like we only focus on. But then
George would, so George, right, isn't there this whole, in physics, there's this quantum foam and there's this, or dark matter, right? Isn't there a whole new?
Right. But I want to say something to George as well. I love what you just said, Mike. Basically, it's just, it's a filling in the blank that creates that connection experience. But for George, what do you say? You can tell us about this empty space, but also what do you say in quantum mechanics? The object doesn't even exist until you perceive it. So how does that correlate with what Mike just said?
Well,
I mean, I don't see a conflict actually between the two.
I don't think.
I don't. I'm just saying, like, does that
there were several things that were said that kind of I wanted to comment on before I answer that question.
Yeah.
One is that I had, like Mike was talking about, a transformative experience. I had one when I was 29, and just a few months before I turned my attention fully to quantum theory at UC Berkeley, where I was studying at the time. And that experience kind of overthrew my whole worldview, because until then I had been a strict materialist, reductionist. I'd thought science answered all the questions, which was why I wanted to study physics and so on. And then I suddenly saw that the world was I just had a very clear experience that the world is of the nature of consciousness. And that the world as we perceive it and as we conceptualize it arises out of consciousness, kind of like in a dream.
Right.
But it's a special kind, it's not just an ordinary dream. But so that, and then then I had to reconfigure for months. I was kind of in a daze. I had to reconfigure, and the study of quantum theory really helped me there, because within quantum theory within classical physics, which was before quantum theory, it's very, very clearly thought of as a world which consists of atoms and which exists in space and which develops according to deterministic laws and so on. And there is no space for consciousness. There's no space for a decision, for freedom, for anything like that. It's just a mechanism. And when I saw that the world was not like that, but then quantum theory helped me see how the world could both have the kind of lawfulness that we interpret as the existence of a material world and be of the nature of consciousness. So the picture that began to emerge as what I call the quantum paradigm is the world as consciousness. The world, it's not my consciousness or your consciousness, it's consciousness, the source, God, spirit, cosmic mind, whatever you want to call it. And individual consciousnesses arise out of that by kind of filtering out nearly all of reality and focusing on those things that are important for the survival of this particular thing. So anyway, that was the background. And an important thing to bear in mind is what I began to realize more clearly is what Mike was talking about with this perceptual thing, that we live and operate within a paradigm. A paradigm is a structure of reality, and we are conditioned both through our physical.
Well, I would say a paradigm is a cognitive structure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Imposed on
Intellectual.
experiential
reality. Yes.
Cognitive, mental.
Yes.
I think it's a language. It's like language is a structure that we apply to sounds and a way to organize our sense experience. And I think vision is a language. I think when we look at things, we don't think of it as we look around the world and we see it as understanding a language, but it is. It's a cognitive. It's a symbol. It's a code, and even like a computer code.
And when I use the word paradigm, I'm not just referring to what Thomas Kuhn was talking about, like a philosophical substrate to understand a theory. It's really the totality. It includes perception, includes conception, it includes all our conditioning, and we operate within that. But we usually don't see it. We are the output of it, so to say, and our perception is the output. And so, as different people and different animals and different beings have different paradigms, different conditionings, we develop this language, but each person has their own paradigmatic overlay. So certain words mean certain things to me, and they form sentences which indicate certain structures and so on. For me, another person has it slightly different, and some people have it very different. And so there's a constant misunderstanding going on, which we're not aware of, because we just think that our experience is of reality. That's reality. We don't realize our own responsibility for how things appear to us. So one of the things that I was very focused on is to become aware of the paradigm I'm operating in, and the paradigm our culture is operating in, and the different political and social paradigms that people have, and why they misunderstand one another, and so on. And very importantly, how you can overcome that schism, that split, by interparadigmatic communication, by people with different paradigms deeply listening to one another and really feeling what the other person is feeling, rather than just hearing the other person's statements in our own paradigm and seeing whether it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then they're simply wrong or they're misled or something like that. So there's this kind of
it sounds
so
like
actually,
there's a subjective experience within a larger objective, but at least I don't know if it's objective, but the point is you still have your subjective experience within the larger parameter.
I think you can. So, for example, George, I love this example of if you were color, so I think of the experience I had as, for example, being colorblind and then having a surgery and then having it corrected and suddenly seeing color. So for example, someone could point to the room around me when I'm colorblind and say, look, this is red, this is green, this is blue. And I could look exactly at the world that he's looking at. I just don't see it. There's nothing he could say to make me see it. And then you have the surgery, and then suddenly you say, "Oh my God, everything you said was correct." That is different than that. That is
well,
different.
actually, when you have a surgery, the first thing is total confusion. I mean, people who are blind and then suddenly regain their sight, it was just a chaos. And then gradually they formed a visual paradigm guided by other people's
The brain,
by the culture, by language, and so on. And then they began to see the same things or similar things as other people see.
Right. So let's connect.
There is a different world. There is I believe this experience I had reveals, like surgery could reveal to a colorblind person color. I think it reveals it's a hidden way in which you are not interpreting your sensory, the stream of sensory information correctly, and that it reveals this other aspect.
Well, correctly is another issue. I mean, it's presumes that there's an absolute point of view but this is quantum theory is a very what I learned, and what not all physicists realize, is that it's a relational. It has to be interpreted in a relational way. That means that what I see, the measurements that I make, the forms I see, in quantum theory are specifically my form. So the wave function, for instance, which is how quantum theory describes physical systems, is my wave function.
Correct.
And it allows me to predict the future. Now there's a large overlap, and you can see that while there is no objective reality, there is subjective realities, and you can see from quantum theory, from the mathematical structure of quantum theory, why those subjective theories yield intersubjective agreement to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Intersubjective has to replace the word objective.
Yeah, I like that. I like that, intersubjective, because that was the idea. Is there such a thing as subjective science? Because let's relate it to the telekinesis, okay? So here's the object, and we put a piece of paper, and we don't, we put it in front of us on a desk, we insulate it, isolate it, we do all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So according to what you just said, there is no empty space between me and the object. So literally, technically, if I move my hand, this movement should eventually interact and interfere with the object, which would make it move, right?
I don't know about the hands. Actually, you don't need your hands.
You don't need, I think it's the
I'm just saying that the idea as an idea.
So when I have,
anything that I basically do or put out, or if it's my hand or my thought, I am making that space between me and the object change. That will transfer my intention to the object. Is this how you see it? Because a lot of people, so for me, basically, what I take out of all of this is that there's a subjective law. I still think there's something that we should call subjective science. But anyway, but that is also interfering or using the natural physical laws that currently exist, interacting with these laws to make this object move. So this object, according to the natural laws of physics and Newtonian laws, all these laws that we all know of, the object can move if there's a change in temperature. The object can move if there is a sudden change in electromagnetism around it. The object can move, so on and so forth. So, or the air molecule. If the air molecules suddenly increase, then it would move the object.
No,
So
what you say is the reason why when we do an experiment, we have to eliminate all conceivable or all things that we can think of or that we know about that could be called physical causes, like
exactly.
friction, temperature, magnetism, electric, and so on. We have to eliminate those. And one of the best ways is to create is to insulate it and then to also create a distance. So, because all physical effects fall off with distance. And if you can do things from a great distance, as the film shows and as we've done ourselves, if you can do things like that, then you can eliminate, you can safely eliminate all physical causes. And then the question is, why is something that I do here have an effect far away? And in quantum theory, there's this phenomenon of entanglement, so that whenever you have a composite system of different parts, those parts are linked in invisible ways, which are independent of distance.
Except that in quantum mechanics, entanglement, it's two actual particles, like actual physical particles.
Well, that's the way you think about it, but they're actually not two physical. They're not objects in the way they cannot be.
Exactly. Exactly. So, but in this case, we're entangled, but it's the mind or the intention that is entangled with a physical object at a distance. So that's, I think, can you help us make a sense scientifically of the idea that, yes, quantum mechanics tells us about entanglement. Actually, it was demonstrated perfectly with two types of physical particles. But why is, when we talk about intention or consciousness, it doesn't work, or what's the difference?
Well,
can I put my 2 cents in?
Yes, please.
Well, I think the reason why replication in this field is so difficult, and a lot of these behaviors and processes are difficult, is because I don't think most people are able to control their mind
exactly
and their intention very well. So we're not trained to work at the level. I think all of this is working at a very deep subconscious, unconscious level. And so, for example, like Caroline, you know, I think your interest in this is for people. How can people improve their lives?
Yes.
And so when people get triggered by events and they get angry or they express rage or crying and they say, well, I didn't really want to get mad. I just couldn't control it. It's because we're not trained to be able to work and deal with these very deep unconscious triggers. So I think a lot of these effects that we're seeing arise from this deep level at which we aren't trained to control. So sometimes, when I do this work, sometimes it works amazingly well, and then I'll have months where I do exactly the same thing and I get no effect. And sometimes you get, very transient effects, and then they disappear. And I believe it's at some level because I'm not that talented at being able.
It's not just that. It's not just that, but you are also by nature a very strong skeptic. So you turn on, you try out a new arrangement. It works perfectly. You get excited, but then you begin to wonder: is it real? And then it dies down. And for months, and I've had the same experience. That's why I can tell you that it really works that way.
Yeah. I remember with Mike, we've been working quite regularly for a while, and then at one point we started questioning, because for all you guys, by the way, if you have not seen the movie, you all need to see this movie. and I hope you agree with me, because I don't think I've ever seen all of this put together in one film in this way, in this format, not just talking about these concepts theoretically as a theory, but demonstrating on camera how it's possible and how it all works. So I'm working with Mike for quite some time on a regular basis for a while. And then, so he's using a Faraday cage, totally isolating, electromagnetism, air molecules, all kinds of outside influences that could affect the piece of paper. Let's not get into the mechanical thing because it's a long discussion and explanation. But basically, you're working with the Faraday cage, and we succeed even with the mechanical effect at making it move. You do that many, many times. I do that long distance, tapping into your space. I'm in Los Angeles, you're in Oregon. And so several times, not just once as a fluke. And then all of a sudden, I did the question of temperature. Well, what if there's a change of temperature? This is what George is saying, the doubt. We have been successful, maybe not every single day, but many, many times. And then but I like that. I mean, I like that we keep questioning. But even when we brought up the question of temperature, I don't think we were able to prove. In fact, we did another experiment to prove that it's really not the temperature change. And so my point, I mean, what George is bringing up, and for the people who are listening, we're always, when something happens that defies the normal known laws and it works, the first reaction is, wait, was that a fluke, or is it a mistake, or where did I miss, this and that? So after we did look into the temperature, do you now feel confident that these were real, the influence of the intention of the mind on the piece of paper?
No.
Still not. Oh my God.
I'm still.
My answer is yes.
I know. He's the,
is yes.
he's the glass half full.
I want to hear the no. Go ahead.
Well,
I'm still skeptic.
Oh my God. You guys, I told you, I have worked with Mike so many times, and he's like, I've seen him do this, and especially was so fascinating, George, for you to know, like when we were setting up the experiment and we were still on the phone. So for those, again, who have not seen the film, to do this scientifically, you have to create a baseline, meaning you take measurement over a period of time. You know what the baseline is before you start the experiment. Let's say we're starting the experiment at 8 o'clock, and Mike and I on the phone saying, okay, you're ready. And as we're both of us talking, remember that? We're both of us talking and focusing on that piece of paper, wanting it to have a very large effect. It just goes nuts. Remember? Every single time.
And it's because the difficulty
because we're just having a casual, detached conversation. We're having fun. We're not attached to and we're not focusing on it like, oh my God, is it going to move? And it was those moments that were the most, I mean, that thing was going crazy.
Well, let me just tell you why I'm so sure that it's an effect and not a physical effect. I came to the conclusion that that these outcomes are not random. They're not determined by me, but they are determined by something, by the larger consciousness, if you will, of which I'm a small part. And so I thought in that case, psychokinesis should really exist. And then I talked about that at a conference, and a guy came up to me and said, well, you can learn that. And I tried it many times. I tried it for years, and it hadn't worked. And so he said, well, we in Russia, in St. Petersburg, we have an institute, and you can. So to make a long story short, I got in touch with them. I went there for 2 weeks. I learned how to do it, and since then, I've been practicing on a daily basis. and I've been in and out of it. Skepticism turned me off sometimes for a whole month, nothing happened, but now it's very regular. And I'm also learning the finesse. It's basically a feedback. It's a physical feedback. Psychokinesis is a physical feedback for this inner process. So when I do things, when I'm in the right mood and the right space and do think, then it works very well. And when I'm not, it doesn't. So I can actually, because I've done it so much and observed my own condition, I know pretty exactly what it is that I have to do, which doesn't, as Mike said, it doesn't always mean that I can do it, because sometimes I'm in a certain kind of rut, but I have a sense of, and I can tell you that belief, suspending disbelief or belief, is an important aspect of it. If you really don't believe it, then it's very hard to do. Sometimes after I've done it thousands of times, I enter a state of skepticism, of disbelief, and then it doesn't work. It didn't work, and it doesn't happen anymore these days. But I know the feeling very well. So now, if I see in my mind's eye, if I see it already turning, when it actually isn't turning yet, but I see it, then it turns the way I want it to turn, the direction I want it to turn. The only thing I don't control at this point is how much. Sometimes it's a very strong effect, sometimes it's a more subtle effect. So I think that has to do with energetic issues. But I know because I've done it for so many years, I have a clear sense that it's not I know when temperature's involved. I mean, if you have the thing and the direct sunlight is hitting it, or the room is heating up or something, then it'll start turning whether you want it to or not.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that your belief and your state of mind is very important, plus the environmental factors. Like on that day, there's this crazy storm, the energy feels weird, you're a little bit off. So what you're saying, it's both. I'm just very so also for those who have tried it, who have taken the class, and that's the first thing I said, not because you move it today that you're going to be able to move it tomorrow, because of all those factors. But the fact that you moved it one day, technically you shouldn't be able to move it, period, right? So that's why
I would be the skeptic and say, maybe it moved because of some thermal,
Well, no, not well. Wait, you have very rigorous protocols for this. I've never seen it done with such rigorous protocol. Like you guys, you have the Faraday cage. You have it also inside, which we started to do last time, inside another box that is also measuring the temperature. Cannot be more rigorous than that. You're creating baselines, you're creating protocols, that's why
it's actually incredibly, incredibly hard to completely isolate the object from all the effects. It's
there's going to be like three air molecules left. Okay,
but it could be those little molecules that are knocking it, and
even from the physical laws, can 3 air molecules maybe knock, make it turn a little bit, or kind of wobble a little bit, but to make it turn 360 degrees, stop, turn the other direction, stop, do it again. It doesn't even make.
I agree. It's unexplained, but I think in science, scientists want more than just the presentation. They want some understanding to go along with it. They want to know a mechanism. So when you do an experiment, it's not just enough to say, look, I did it here, I did it there. That's
no, but there's more than that. They want an explanation which fits into their paradigm.
Yes,
that is in the case of most scientists is not possible, because with a mechanistic paradigm it just doesn't work. You can't do it. Psychokinesis is impossible from a point of view of a mechanistic paradigm.
Yeah, because you're trying to resolve a non-physical phenomenon using physical laws. It just doesn't
Well,
work.
No,
consciousness,
if the physical laws are mechanistic,
Exactly. So it doesn't. It
then it
doesn't. We
doesn't
can't.
work. But if you understand that everything arises out of consciousness, then it's
Exactly.
a whole different ball game.
Exactly.
The physical laws as we know them from classical physics are statistical laws. They just count how likely is it that this situation evolves into that one. And for the case of planets moving around the sun, or even a ball thrown through an orbit of a ball thrown through the air, the probabilities of a certain behavior are enormously concentrated on a certain thing, and that's what we call the law that things have to move that way. But actually, from a quantum point of view, that's only a probabilistic law, and it's only very likely that things behave that way, but it's possible that they behave in a completely different way. But in order to make it behave in a different way, if it was just blind, you'd have to wait 10 lengths of the universe, until one little fluctuation occurs. But when you bring into the picture the what we let's call the mind, then even the most unlikely things can happen. So, for instance, the thing that Mike and I have been working on is, first of all, we didn't discover this. This was already mentioned to me by a Russian scientist, head of the Leningrad physics department, who had experimented with this for years. He told me in a vacuum it can't be done, and that made a lot of sense to me, because if the energy doesn't come from me, and it doesn't seem to come from me, because if you can do it at such a distance to transmit any kind of physical energy directly over such distances, it will become weaker and weaker until. But so the energy has to come from the environment, according to this to this thinking. So the like, for instance, air molecules are banging against this object from both sides, and on the average equally. If you look very carefully, there'll be a slight little oscillation back and forth, which we call Brownian movement. But grosso, you'll just see it still. But if you could somehow
Zoom in.
organize it,
Yeah.
organize it with your mind, give it the information
or
that's
create more ordered.
from this side than
Right.
from that side, then it would start turning. And the classical physicists would say, well, that's just a coincidence. But as I said, from if you go through it statistically, you'd have to wait many universe lengths, trillions of years, to see something like that, and you can just do it in a few seconds. So, but the hypothesis that we were testing is that if there is some way for the environment to impart energy to this thing and make it move, then we can organize it. But if you completely eliminate that possibility by putting it in a vacuum on a needle point and so on, then it won't happen. And that's what we found so far, that if it doesn't have to be molecules. Mike had the idea of using sound, vibration, and so the vibrations make the thing on the needle go like a little bit like that. So now, as soon as it's off center, then you can transmit
Yeah, I
energy.
mean, but the only thing we're doing is just raising the level of uncertainty by a teeny, teeny, tiny bit, and
Well, actually,
that
we're
is.
reducing the level of uncertainty.
I'm sorry. Sorry. We're reducing the level of uncertainty by a tiny bit, and that's taken into account in the baseline. So we can see that even with this mechanical oscillation, it's still kind of maintaining
it wobbles back and forth like that.
Yeah, it's a
then you can
all of a sudden,
it actually gives it a systematic. You can give it a systematic turn.
Yeah, but then all of a sudden, the minute Mike focus on it, it just jumps like crazy. So that's why, like, whether it's this mechanical thing, whether it's the 3 air molecules, whether it's the temperature, it doesn't even make logical sense that it would trigger that sort of response. And so
also, you've affected the pH right?
Yeah.
And the electrochemistry in solutions. So I think it would be the same thing, that you demonstrated also in those
Yeah.
other systems.
And the healing.
And I did
healing in a movie.
the water thing many times. I did the DNA many times, and in fact, in the film, the DNA effect was only like 100% jump. But I've done it before where it's like 400%. I mean, just all this to say that, these were repeatable experiences. The difference, though, which I would love to have your take on this, when I work with water or DNA, or an electronic device, an electrical device, the experience is very different. I feel like when I'm working with an electrical device, I feel like I'm pushing it, like I'm making it do whatever. It's an experience. It doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. When I'm working with water or with DNA, I feel like literally that it's part of my being. So whatever I think, I'm saying like literally in a second, it responds. It's as if it's me. Mm-hmm. And this has been consistent. That's why in the movie I said I felt like I zapped it, because the second I looked at it, it just did that.
When the moment that I began to view the world as part of me.
1 second, George, let me just real quick finish, because I love your comment. But when I work with a physical object, it's not the same experience at all.
But what I want to say, it can be, because for me, when I was able to experience the world as me, but not me as George, I mean, me as, in a larger sense, then when I can actually, it's as if I was moving my body, but it's not my physical body.
Right.
And so the more you can do that, you just said it. This is when you, with these electrochemical and water and so on, you're able to somehow embody it, and that makes it very easy and direct. And if you think you have to push it, then it's already pushing is already outside of yourself. Mm-hmm. So what I've learned in my own practice is that the more you can embody it, the more you can make it part of your own being, the better it works.
I don't know, but like Tom Campbell says that it's actually, there's the level of uncertainty, like there's more little molecule bumping into each other. There's more randomness that you can work with. The hydrogen molecules could be are bouncing around. So when you focus on increasing the level of the number of hydrogen molecule to lower the pH or vice versa, it's already kind of doing that sort of movement. So that's his explanation. And for me, it's maybe that, but it's also the substance itself and the belief system. Water or DNA is an organic, biological system, whereas a physical object, psychologically, we're trained, like Mike was saying in the beginning, we perceive it as a finite material thing outside of us.
And what I'm saying is that you can retrain yourself. And
exactly. I love that. So you guys saw we did that. I would love to also know your take on these experiments. So you saw the movie. First of all, how, from your perspective, I know you were in it. You participated in the telekinesis portion. But how did the movie come across to you? How did you like it? What is your perspective on it?
I thought it was great. I loved it. I showed it to my daughter, who was 13, and she loved it, especially the I think it was the last segment with the children.
Yes.
You were reading and right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I thought, so I think she related to that because of the children, but I thought that was also very, I was actually very impressed with that behavior in those.
Yeah.
I had an experience of that myself. Yeah. About 20 years ago, I brought an Israeli psychic over, and he turned out to do some cheating too. But it was some things. So, but I don't want to say he's a complete fraud, but he's kind of like, even Uri Geller cheated at times, but he's also the real thing. But this guy, I blindfolded him myself, and with a triple blindfold, and we got into a car. He drove me around in the traffic, so I know that the thing is real. But to see the kids playing ping pong and so on, it's
Yeah.
in spite of everything, it's still mind blowing.
Isn't
My
it?
daughter, who's 8 years old, she was also totally fascinated with it.
So we just taught the class online because usually it's a live thing. You want to be one on one, but because of what's happening, nobody can travel. So we tried it online, and after 2 classes for kids, after 2 classes, the kids were able to read and do puzzles.
Really?
Yes, yes, incredible. So this is working. So we're going to continue doing it. In fact, on my website, superhumanfilm.com, there's a workshop already listed that for kids and for adults.
Oh, so my daughter
Is it
could.
possible
Yeah.
to join it?
Yeah,
Oh, my daughter would love it.
absolutely.
Is it still possible now to join it?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
both
yeah.
started?
Just go to
Yeah.
the website Superhuman Film and go to workshops, and we have one starting in September. So so again, like from a neuroscientist and a theoretical physicist perspective. Well, first of all, there's people cheating in all areas, like. And sometimes people say, wait, I can duplicate this with magic. I mean, you could duplicate many things in magic. It doesn't mean that I didn't do it. It just means that you can duplicate it as a magic trick, So that's why I think people who are on the outside, who are on the fence about all this thing, like, when they hear something like this argue, to me, it's not an argument. It's just whatever. So those who are cheating are doing whatever they're doing this for whatever reason. But I, as you know, in the film, I personally, I was there. I tried it myself. I could see, like you're saying, your friend was completely, you did the blindfold yourself. So this is a real phenomenon. And it's crazy when you think about the implications for blind people or visually impaired folks. So how do you think that from a neuroscience perspective or theoretical physicist, how is this working from your perspective?
Well, I have no idea, but there is something called blind sight, where people who are blind, and this is in journals. These are real studies. So a person who is technically blind and cannot see, they'll do tests, and for example, they'll throw a ball at them, and the person will catch it. And they'll say, well, how did you do that? And they say, I have no idea. I couldn't see it consciously. So I think, it's like I was saying before, there's what we are aware of in terms of what we truly are is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what comes into our conscious awareness. I think there is a huge amount of I don't know what, and that's the issue. What is this? And
Consciousness.
You're right. And there's a huge amount of other things that we are that doesn't percolate up into our awareness. And that's one thing that I have noticed since I've started the meditation practice, and that this is what I think meditation, how it at least operates in me, is it seems to reduce that threshold. So the threshold for what appears in consciousness, for me, I think most of my life was pretty high. So something had to be pretty big in order for me to say, oh, yes, I see that, I feel that, or, that's something that I can experience. But what meditation has done for me, it's taken that threshold and it lowers it, so that I notice in my everyday life that I'm much more aware of subtle things happening in my body, and things that normally that are, they're very subtle and very delicate. But I think they're true. And most people, maybe if they experience that, they may say, oh, that's the burrito I ate earlier.
Yeah.
But I think there is some, it's replicable. And and they are true, but do you know what I'm saying? It's kind of hard to articulate.
It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum, and
it's a spectrum, right? And
beyond the physical body is, and then so it depends where you are. Are you close to the spectrum? Are you in the spectrum? And that allow. And of course, nobody understands the spectrum, and so, but everything, all these experiences happen within this spectrum. Is, I think, what you're saying, correct?
Right. And I think at least the meditation for me has reduced. So if there's a spectrum here, and I'm aware of what's happening in this region, the meditation for me has taken that threshold, that boundary, and it's begun to drop it a little bit. So things that normally would not have arisen into my awareness, so that I could say, yes, that exists. It's like before when I was saying a colorblind person can't see color, but they can have surgery and then see color. I think in meditation, by reducing that threshold,
yes,
suddenly the things that were veiled to you and you were unconscious of, like color, suddenly you say, hey, there's something out there that I was never aware of, and it has to do with dropping that threshold. So I think these kids and these people, they are more aware of these unconscious, subconscious processes that I think are going on in everyone, but we just aren't trained and are unable to bring them into awareness so that we can actually make use of them in our daily life. But I think training can help to do that, bring that into.
Yeah, George, I know you have to go. Sorry, Mike. I know you have to go, but I'd love to. There's some people asking some questions. So do you have to go?
I mean, I think this is important. So I just wanted to comment on this from the perspective of the one mind metaphysic, if you want to call it. There is only the one mind. That's the only thing that really is. But we seem to, we seem to form these. This one mind seems to form filters which end up like in an individual, and the individual has been genetically, evolutionarily determined to focus on those things that lead to survival, and so the other things are dropped. If we focus on deconditioning that and kind of enlarging the scope, there's no limit. I mean, what Buddhism calls full enlightenment is basically the filter falls altogether, and you just realize you are and have always been, and there only is the one mind. But to undo that completely is difficult, but at least you can undo it a little bit, and the more you can undo it, the more this omniscience, this omnipresence, this thing opens up to you.
And this is exactly what I think we've done in the film, and we're showing tools and different ways, because if you do this to water, if you do this to DNA, if you do this to the piece of paper, therefore you start to undo this programming that keeps you so limited, and start to kind of enlarge that spectrum. So how did you like the film, George?
I loved it.
Yeah.
It has a broad spectrum of things. What it didn't delve into is the kind of the death, the thanatology, the study of death and death states, and the larger spectrum in which life is happening, and that's of course closely related to what this is too.
Yeah. But, I mean, there's so much you can do. I wanted to keep it on.
No, I understand.
That is all in my books and in my, in my teachings. But for the film, basically, the common denominator is the connection between consciousness and the outside world. And so, but anyway, I know you have to go, George. Are you okay with time?
You just go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Mike, I'm going to keep you. This is a fascinating conversation. I mean, because your perspective and your experience in the field, when you talk about that, I still believe there's such a thing as, or it has to, instead of science of consciousness, it's a subjective science. We have to come up with the laws that govern those experiences. They're not the same, but I think they could be.
In neurobiology, people have tried in cognitive science, they call that qualia. Have you, George, you've heard that?
Not really. Qualia?
Like qualities.
Oh,
It's the
oh yeah,
science of quality.
okay, okay. Is this legitimate or just some people starting to come up?
Well, this was like years and years ago, like in the 50s and 40s.
Yeah.
But when you read it, they were trying to put it on a scientific foothold.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, like George is saying, the science of quality and experience doesn't fit in our current.
But that's the thing. It shouldn't fit. It shouldn't fit. It's like we cannot explain this with these laws. We cannot explain this with these laws. I think they should be combined. And
But
somehow
it's kind of like it's apples and oranges.
Not really. No, and not to combine to make one, but to say that this one doesn't deny this one doesn't deny that. That's all.
You're right. That's different, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's like you're saying what when we're talking about this paradigm, this world of the physical, these are the laws which we know are real, and when we are in this range, these are the laws. That's it. So we're not saying. The problem is that the traditional science wants to deny and debunk, and that's the problem. There's nothing to debunk. It's just doesn't fall under your jurisdiction.
So I was in that science world, and I understand it. And it's not that they are evil, malevolent people against it. But it doesn't. There is no way that that people, and I myself included, could incorporate those into the worldview that our results are trying to support. They just were outliers. Yeah. And so if it doesn't support your work and you don't find any way that you can incorporate it, then you just it's not going to help you in your scientific career. It's not going to help you in your scientific.
The sociology
I agree, but then don't say it's not real or it doesn't exist.
But this is the nature of paradigm. Yeah. Within a meta paradigm, within a structure that paradigms operate in, many paradigms. They're like living beings. They try to maintain themselves. They have an immune system that keeps out things that threaten them.
Doesn't make sense, yeah.
So it's a religion. It's like a religion in the sense that it gives you security, it gives you a sense of control, and of course, as Mike was saying, it gives you a job and it gives you understanding.
It makes sense. But I have a question, you guys, from somebody. She's saying, I want to ask if you ever measured brain frequencies. That's probably more from Mike. During telekinesis. I know that other folks have done that with this type of mind over matter thing, even with the blindfold. But have you ever tried something like that?
No. Okay. I would like to, but I would need an EEG.
Right.
But no.
Okay, this has not been okay. Let me.
There's actually a very good episode. Who is Stan Lee? You know that show? What was it? Was it Superhuman? What did he call it?
It was a series. Yeah.
So you can whoever asked that question. There's a very good episode where he brought in someone who was doing psychokinesis. Like I don't know if he was Israeli. So they brought him to a UCLA cognitive psychologist, and he connected. He recorded the EEG brainwaves of the person while he was doing some kind of a task, and showed a beaut. And in fact, they have a poster of it. You can look up online. Okay. I don't remember the name of the researcher, but he actually presented this as a poster. So it's. And I saw the episode, and I actually looked up the researcher and found the poster and read it myself. And again, a lot of this work, I would say it's.
What does it look like?
Oh, for that single event, it's a very. I think it's a very good correlation, and I don't see that there was any other factors that affected it. But which
brainwave was the most active?
It was very impressive. But again, this is what in the scientific, if you were a career scientist, you would say this is anecdotal because you need replication.
Yeah.
some way to say, to understand it within the context of your kind of your scientific framework. So this is like a one-off, which is impressive, but a scientist would say, okay, so what?
Yeah.
What do I do?
There are different people doing. So I know somebody who's been doing that just EEG, QEEG on all. Yeah.
I want to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody's Dr. Fannin actually, but I think he's studying all kinds of experiment, not necessarily, like this telekinesis or something.
Mm-hmm.
I know of other folks who are also studying. They have an app actually. It's measuring, I think, 19 points. I don't know how many points of the brain, and it's not just showing the waves. The
alpha, beta, delta.
No. It's actually, I mean, it's showing that, but it's also showing it as a pattern. And so it's fascinating because they did that with blindfold kids. And as they were trying to read with the blindfold, apparently it was creating this very harmonious pattern, like every single time. What that means, we have to keep going in the research, but I'm just saying that there are those folks who are trying to correlate those abilities with brainwaves and states of consciousness. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So cool. Let me see if there are any other questions or comment, like tons of comments, let me see if this one makes sense, because I've been not really reading and not. My neighbor was telling me her son said that they can shift inside 360 degrees and can spin forward in time and back. How does that correlate with any sort of ability like that? Does that make sense to you? In other words, do these experiences have something to do with time space? I want to mention something that was fascinating, Mike. Do you remember when I was in the beginning trying to figure out how I was supposed to move that piece of paper from LA where you were? So I was trying different things. I was imagining the air molecules. I was imagining the temperature. But in one time, I literally visualized that the piece of paper were disappearing and reappearing, disappearing, and it was breaking down its molecular structure and recreating it in time space. And so it was literally the pixels of the image were out and back in this position, out and then back in, out and then back in. And the graph on that day, if you remember, was kind of like jagged like that. Do you remember that?
Right.
And I felt like
quantized. Yeah, it was move and then stop and then move. It wasn't a continuous motion, but it was movement and then another movement. Right.
Yeah, and to me, that was probably one of the most effective ways of doing it. And I was literally working with time and space. I was focusing on time and space, the piece of paper, but it was dissolving, not existing in time or space, and re-existing in time or in a different space.
Well, actually, the way it happens is it's not the whole object disappears. It's like, so to say, atom by atom. It comes and goes. It's like a TV screen. When you see a picture, an image of a tennis ball on TV screen, if you look very closely and expand time very close, so like slow motion, then you see one dot, another dot, another dot, another dot. But when they follow in time so closely upon another that they give the impression of a continuous object that exists.
Right.
And that is actually the way it happens. And so one shamanic technique, which is called grainy seeing, is like actually seeing, dissolving, where you look at an object and you actually begin to see it as a grainy thing. And when you can do that, then you can work with it better.
Because you're breaking down to molecule, like subatomic particles.
You're breaking down the idea of a continuous existence. You're bringing into your paradigm into the fact that it's in and out, that it's events a rapid sequence of events rather than just a thing.
And I think so. Then time and space is so the connection between the way we perceive the physical world, or maybe the way we want to affect the physical world, is connected through time and space. So can we say that we can use that idea, that concept, to change things in our life in general?
Well,
I mean,
some people would
make your boyfriend disappear or something like that. but I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like,
well, some people say that time and space are really not necessarily physically given constraints, but they are cognitive constructs.
yeah,
And again, like I was saying before, time and space are ways in which this organism, this whatever we are in this brain, is a code or a language for organizing our sensory experience. And it's just possibly just one way, and there could be other ways too. And so, like the children that are seeing, these things that are kind of sub threshold, subconscious. There's what enters into consciousness is just the dominant kind of, the largest, biggest things that our brain is releasing up into our awareness, but that I believe that there's a larger amount of things that most people are just not operating. We can't utilize it because it doesn't come into our awareness where we can manipulate it and work with it mentally.
But what I thought the question addressed was whether the future, whether you can kind of move into the future and past.
Yeah,
and I mean, there was a book written in the 1930s called An Experiment with Time, about a guy who started to discover that he could dream precognitively, and he kept a diary, and then he got better and better in it, and he could like suddenly he would experience something that he had dreamed two days ago, and he could see in his diary, and it was exactly that. That was kind of the beginning of that, and then the Seth books developed that, and so on. So, and then there's the pre-sentiment experiments of Dean Radin and others, where just an instant before something is a computer-generated thing, and then an instant before it happens, your physiology already responds to it. So yes, it seems to be that there is some ability to sense the future, but that shouldn't be taken to mean that the future is determined.
Right.
It's more like a probability pattern, a karmic pattern, but what actually happens is still open. So for instance, you can dream that a plane will crash, and then not take the plane, you're in a crashing plane and then not take the plane, or even warn the people, and then maybe they'll listen to it. So it's not that it is the future, but it is a likely blueprint for the future.
There's actually interesting brain studies where, and I think the Defense Department is interested in this for pilots, if they record EEG activity, that they can detect if the pilot is going to make a correct or incorrect move before the pilot is even actually aware of it, because there is a brain signal that occurs about 500 milliseconds before the awareness of the act actually is, before the pilot is actually aware of it. So this is actually being able to show that there is brain activity. Again, this is what I would call is more, unconscious, subconscious brain activity that is actually then determining what is actually operating at a level before your awareness actually.
I totally agree. And I think that if we cultivate those abilities, and again, these are tools, telekinesis, the blindfolds, these are just tools to practice these and enhance those abilities. I think that it's definitely correlated with the idea, or it actually helps with the idea that your consciousness starts to know how to integrate the time space and move it around so that you can shift your immediate experience or know ahead of time consciously, as opposed to it happening on an unconscious level. You start to kind of be more of a catalyst to the experience, more of the initiator of the experience, as opposed to, I don't really know how it happened, but it did. And so that's the idea of introducing all these tools and all these concepts for people to be empowered.
I think, right, because I think a lot of people, and myself included, even before the meditation, you feel as if you are at the whim of external forces.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So even emotionally, that things happen, and like I really didn't want to get angry. I didn't want that to happen, but I just couldn't control it. And I think these, like you're saying, these are tools. There's in Chinese medicine, there's their concept of healing is if there is a smoldering twig, it takes very little energy to put it out when it's smoldering. But if you let it smolder and it catches a log on fire and then it spreads to the forest, by the time it's this huge forest fire, you can't deal with it anymore. And so you want to deal with these things at that very subtle initial moment before they come in. By the time they enter your consciousness, they're already a full flaring forest fire.
Right.
And you're overwhelmed by these things.
Right.
And
exactly.
So the meditation.
Yeah.
So from a quantum theoretical perspective, the wave function allows you, or the state vector allows you to predict the probability of an event, but not what the next actual event will be. Just the probability. If you have a large set of such situations, what is the probability that this will happen rather than that? But and so that's from the perspective that is the normal perspective in quantum theory for quantum theorists, that quantum theory just gives you the probability, but it's a random process.
Right.
But through this work, you begin to see it's not a random process.
Right.
It's actually the universe determining each thing exactly as it be. But you are part of the universe. So if you learn how to navigate that, then something which is very unlikely can actually, you can make it happen. So it's much more fluid. So you can operate with you can rather than just being a helpless kind of log leaf in the wind. This actually ties together with the idea about the secret or the law of attraction.
Yeah, but that's
law of attraction is this kind of thing, but not applied to a physical object or to pH or something, but just to situations in life.
Yeah.
So seeming coincidences conspire to bring about certain results.
Yeah.
And another thing to mention is that if many people, a group of people are in synchrony, if they're in kind of in resonance with one another, then
like an emotional
can be amplified. So a group of people could actually make, you say like 1% of the population, if they work together in this way, they could make even climate change or large factors they could influence directly. So I think this is at this moment just a speculation. It's an extrapolation from what we know, but I think it's very reasonable to think that as we as a species become more conversant with this, we can actually consciously shape the outcome, even large-scale processes, which we now take to be just given, and we're at the effect of.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly the point of the film. That's the reason why I chose the timing, because I feel that more and more people are observing these random effects and know there's something behind it. We are able to predict those outcomes, shift those outcomes if we know how. So anyway, you guys, this has been incredible. I can talk to you for hours and hours and hours. I mean, this is so fascinating coming from your different perspectives. So thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate it. There's more. We're going to do more. And Mike, as soon as I'm done with the film, let's start again our series of experiments. All right. Thank you
Actually,
guys
bring
so
some
much.
more.
It's been amazing to know you, to work with you. I'm so grateful you were in the film.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
and I hope to see your kids in the classes and you too as well. So
Thank you.
thanks for being here. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, you guys. So I hope you enjoyed this. I can literally talk to these guys for hours. It's so fascinating because their background makes it so interesting and intriguing. And so, anyway, thank you for joining me today. Again, please go to superhumanfilm.com. You have to watch this film over and over because, again, it's reaffirming everything so many people have been talking about. But we are literally demonstrating, we are showing on camera in real time how this is all possible. All right. So superhumanfilm.com. Subscribe to my channel, follow the pages. We're offering all these programs for free. So please share them with all your friends. It doesn't cost anything and it just helps us out. And if you have seen the film and you do think that it is important to share, please write a comment, go to Amazon, write a comment. That way other people can be encouraged to look into it because there are a lot of folks who are just opening up to these subjects. Could you imagine? And they're on the fence or they don't quite understand it. So use this film for your work to empower you in your work, but also to help spread this very, very important message that you are the creator of your experience and there's so much you could control if you train your mind to do so. All right. So that's it for me for today. Thanks again. And I hope to see you next time on my next YouTube or Facebook Live. Thanks so much.